The topic is solving absolute value equations and inequalities. Alright, let's do these examples. These are the tricky ones, if you know. These are kind of like tricky ones. When you have a 0 on the right side, what happened? Alright, so each one is different. So if we try to do the first example, we have bigger or equal. So which one we use? We use number 3, right? Bigger. If this is bigger or equal, by the way, the only difference, this would be less or equal, bigger or equal. Alright, so according to number 3, whatever inside the parentheses is supposed to be less or equal than k. Remember, this is my k. K happens to be 0. It's okay because 0 is bigger or equal than 0. It's not a negative number. So less or equal than negative k, or x plus 1 is bigger or equal than k. My k is 0. Now let's finish this one. Negative 0 is just 0. X plus 1, right? Negative 1 times 0 is just 0. Now solving for x, I'm going to subtract both sides, negative 1 from both sides. I get x less or equal than negative 1. I'll do the same thing here. X is bigger or equal than negative 1. Right? Now let me try to use the graph. So here's all we have is negative 1, negative infinity to infinity. I want all the numbers that are smaller than negative 1, and negative 1 is included. And I want all the numbers that are bigger than negative 1, and negative 1 is included. So basically, the solution will be all the numbers. Negative 1 is in there, right? So the solution here will be negative infinity to infinity. Plus it makes sense because we also know absolute value of any number is always bigger or equal than 0. So it works for any x. Alright, now what about for example 2? Example 2, less or equal means we need to use number 2. Remember, when this is less or equal, the only difference, this will be less or equal, less or equal. So according to number 2 says, whatever inside the parentheses is going to be between negative k, remember my k again is 0, negative k and k. What does it mean? Let me do this in 2 steps. What does it mean negative 0? Negative 1 times 0 is still 0. Now what do? I want to get rid of the 1. I'm looking for x. I'm going to subtract 1 from all sides. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Now what are the numbers that are between negative 1 and 1? There's only one number, which is negative 1. So my solution is not an interval. It's just one number, so I use bracelets. Right? Alright, now let's do the next example. The next example is strictly bigger than 0. So I'm gonna use number 3, right? It's bigger. Remember, bigger or equal or strictly bigger is the same. So what does number 3 says? Number 3 says whatever is inside the parentheses. Remember, my k again is still 0. Whatever inside the parentheses is less than negative k, or whatever inside the parentheses is bigger than k. So solving for x, we get x is less than, remember negative 0 is 0, 0 minus 1, minus 1. Or x is bigger than, oops, my k happened to be here, 0. Right? So subtract 1, x is strictly bigger than negative 1. Now let me find the solution here. Let's do the graph. The graphs go from negative 1 to negative infinity to infinity. We have only negative 1. Now I want all the numbers that are strictly less than negative 1. Means all of these. Negative 1 is not included. And I want all the numbers that are bigger than negative 1. So not included means I'm going from negative infinity to negative 1, and then from negative 1 to infinity. So I have to do union. So all the numbers except negative 1. So s is equal negative 1, negative infinity to negative 1, union negative 1 to infinity. I'm using parentheses, meaning I'm excluding negative 1. Alright, let's do the next example. Solve for x, absolute value of x plus 1 is less than 0. So we need to use number 2. So what does number 2 says? Number 2 says that whatever is inside the parentheses is going to be between negative k, again my k is 0, negative k and k. Right? Which means what? Which means x plus 1 is between negative 0 is just 0, 0. Now, let's solve. So let's solve for x. So subtract 1 from all sides. This will be x. This will be negative 1. And this will be negative 1. So we're looking for a number that's between negative 1 and negative 1, but it's not equal to negative 1. Of course, there is no solution. Right? There is no number that's between negative 1 and negative 1, and it's not equal to negative 1. But of course, you can see that without even that. If you look at number 5 says absolute value of x is always strictly or bigger or equal to 0. It cannot be. This says absolute value of a number cannot be smaller than strictly smaller than 0. So you could have just said s is equal. There is no solution right away. All right, so that's it for this example.